Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Just days after Toto Wolff made some highly questionable remarks at the expense of Lewis Hamilton, Toto now says that no, those comments on Hamilton's shelf life and effectively his decline as a driver and leaving Mercedes at the end of the season were somewhat taken out of context. Do we buy Toto Wolff's effective apology on this situation, or is there more to this than meets the eye yet again? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. It is finally Las Vegas Grand Prix weekend. This is the camo, or the livery, that Alpine will be running from now until the end of the season. It's pink. I mean, here we go. We're back. Alpine are back to being pink again. I don't know how it's going to look actually under the lights, but I'll take it, to be fair. It's something different. Racing Point vibes, better than what Alpine usually run. Is their car going to be any good? Probably not, but time will tell. They did deliver, let's not forget, a double podium somehow in Brazil a couple of weekends ago. Now, more drama on yesterday's drama between Ralf Schumacher and Antonio Perez. If you guys didn't see, Ralf Schumacher has been pretty critical of Perez, is this Sergio Perez, and understandably so. Checo's father, Antonio, didn't take that especially kindly and made some pretty outrageous comments we talked about yesterday at the expense of Ralf Schumacher, given recent revelations. So, Ralf Schumacher... Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Ralf Schumacher in his punditry, but on this one he has nailed it on the money. I would also stand behind my son 100% and try and help. That's how you do it as a father. Regarding the style of the criticism, however, I would be different, but we all know Mr. Perez with all of his emotions. So, Ralf Schumacher, pretty calm takedown, but nonetheless throwing a couple of jabs back the other way and saying that, look, Antonio, too emotional, certainly on this one. That's why I'm not mad at him. However, I think the track results would be the better arguments, right? So, look, at the end of the day, Antonio, controversial not, he can say what he wants. Ralf Schumacher throwing the haymaker back and basically saying, look, at the end of the day, what Checo does on the track is going to determine what happens here, regardless of what anyone may or may not say in the public eye. So Checo has 3 more rounds to prove himself, maybe less than that, depending on when that decision at Red Bull may potentially be made. Speaking of other drivers upcoming, we did hear rumours the other day that Guan Yu Zhou was a potential candidate to be the reserve driver at Ferrari next year. That now seems less likely. According to, Giuliano de Kessler at Formula Uno, I think they're known as another publication now, but, we're going to still probably call them Formula Uno for the time being. He reckons Antonio Giovinazzi is going to be Ferrari's reserve, and there will be Arthur Leclerc as well, right? Of course, younger brother of Charles Leclerc. And Giuliano says straight up that Zhou has no chance of being next year's Ferrari reserve driver. So, interesting to hear where that rumour came from and who's right and who's wrong on this one, although I will say this kind of scenario does seem more likely and credible, and we know that De Kessler and the Formula Uno guys do have serious ties to that Ferrari team. Kimi Antonelli, he's coming in for Mercedes next year, and he's made some very interesting statements actually. He talked about how Hamilton had helped him a lot, certainly in Singapore, working with him in the garage, and how Antonelli believes himself and Lewis have similar driving styles on some level. His comments about Russell, though, I thought were actually quite telling. And I think that already Antonelli expects that to be a nice rivalry. Whether it will be, I don't know. I think George has been underrated, frankly, over the last couple of seasons. The fact that he is, he's beating or matching Hamilton in 2 of the last 3 seasons is incredibly commendable. And yeah, last year wasn't great, and there's various caveats as to why things are going as they currently are in 2024. We know that Hamilton isn't the biggest fan of this generation of cars. Russell prefers the way that Mercedes is currently handling compared to Hamilton. There's talk about slightly different versions of the car anyway, but the argument might be that Hamilton is setting up his car differently to try and make it behave how he likes, but that's not really happening. And Hamilton might not be performing at the absolute peak level that he was a couple of years ago, and he was just mega fast, mega consistent, quali race all of the time. And that might be in part what Toto Wolff is talking about. We'll get to here in a second. But look, whatever the situation is, it's not like it's easy to compare Russell and Hamilton on some level just because the car's been kind of all over the place for the last couple of years. It doesn't make it easy to really feel where those two guys are performing. But I do feel like Russell's been on the verge of getting underrated with his performances against Hamilton, and Antonelli's coming in hoping to beat him. And I thought these comments are kind of interesting I had great speed right away. You can already see Antonelli's confidence here, and I think it's nice to kind of just take note of this. I struggled at the beginning with the race pace, but after a test in Spa, they saw a clear step forward, and they were convinced that I was effectively the man for the job. 2 days later, the call came in. They were taking me for 2025. Today in F1, you've got a lot of data to look at. There's live telemetry. They can tell you what to do, but they let me do a lot at Spa. I did a great test where I learned to anticipate the tyre degradation, and obviously he went to Monza. That didn't go so well. He crashed after his first couple of laps, and yeah, he says the first lap was a unique emotion with all the people in the stands. Then I got naughty. Now I'll have more opportunities in Mexico and Abu Dhabi. So he said this a little while ago, but this final comment was interesting. Russell, he wasn't very happy, but going out to the Parabolica, I had gone fast. I have a good relationship with George. He hasn't given me great advice, but for now everything is fine. But next year I want to beat him. So this is kind of telling, right? Because he said earlier in the article that, and he said this before, we've mentioned this before, that Antonelli, or like Hamilton, has given Antonelli some good advice, helping him get up to speed and everything, and that makes sense. Whereas, for whatever reason, that hasn't really been the case so much with George, and he just straight up says it. It's pretty blunt. It's kind of, you know, classic pre-media training driver, where he kind of doesn't throw Russell under the bus exactly, but he just says it bluntly that, yeah, George hasn't really given me any advice, certainly not any great advice. For now, that's fine, but next year I want to beat him. So, of course, you want to beat him, and I think it's going to be a fascinating rivalry, this. And I think George, he knows how things are over there. He knows he's the team leader, but I think this maybe points at something that is a bit of a concern for Mercedes, at least with Russell as your team leader, is that, you know, I felt this about Russell before and still do. I think he's an incredibly talented driver, great in qualifying, not quite as strong in the race. He's obviously made his mistakes in high-profile moments over the last couple of seasons. But I do think Russell at times has the Ocon effect, where it seems like he would prefer to beat his teammate than actually win the race at times. And I think there is part of that in play here, where it seems like Hamilton will do basically anything for the betterment of the team. I'm not always sure I see Russell like that. And I think this is maybe another instance where Russell is, you know, he could help Antonelli, and therefore that would benefit the team and the constructors. But Russell would prefer, and understandably, like if I was in Russell's POV, I'm not saying I would do things differently here. At the end of the day, Mercedes might come out with a rocket ship next year that's capable of winning the championship. Why would I help my teammate unnecessarily when I might win the drivers? But still, you could argue it's for the betterment of the team, and even for Russell to have a stronger teammate, because it's not like Antonelli's expected to beat Russell or really get especially close to him next year as his first season in Formula 1 with a pretty damn good team on paper. But it doesn't seem like Russell's trying that hard to help him effectively, and Antonelli has obviously taken note of that and is saying, yeah, that's fine for now, George, but I'm going to beat you next year type thing, which is very exciting to see how that gets on. Ferrari, that's where Hamilton is going. They're expected on current trajectory to be stronger of the two teams that we've just mentioned next year. This is one interesting thing. So Racing News 365 discuss the unleashing of a secret weapon for Ferrari in Las Vegas. Now, basically what this is mathematics. That's what they're talking about. There's no special technology. But the point is, Las Vegas is going to be quite cold, and managing the way the tyres interact with the car and the tarmac in those conditions is quite challenging. And apparently, based on data collected last season in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Maranello engineers were able to significantly refine the mathematical model of energy heat transmission within the tread, which varies depending on the compound used. Which, you know, kind of going through all the technical jargon here, basically means that they should be better prepared to set up their car in order to deal with those situations. Now, it's not necessarily true that other teams won't have done this, but there is a feeling that this new mathematical model that Ferrari have come up with, which simulates the behavior of the tyres, especially in these colder conditions, is going to do a better job in giving them the insight they need to deliver a good performance on the track. We know that the tyres, in many ways, are like the most important thing in Formula 1, at least in terms of determining your performance on quali and race day. And getting to grips with that is, at times, it seems black magic between the various teams. Ferrari think they might have solved that with their new mathematical model that they are going to unleash as a secret weapon in Las Vegas. So we'll see if it does anything. Of course, they were competitive there, Ferrari, last year, and that could be critical for the championship. There's obviously been people saying this weekend, what if the same thing happens in, let's say, Las Vegas as happened in Mexico and Austin, where Ferrari end up winning, potentially even getting a 1-2, and then in the end, Max managed manages to outfox Lando and maybe allow a Ferrari 1-2 victory, but of course holding on to the World Championship. And that would be quite interesting this Las Vegas race if, let's say, Max was to beat Lando, secure the World Championship, but maybe in their fighting, Ferrari were potentially to secure a 1-2. And if that was to be the case, then, that World Constructors' Championship is very much so alive. Sainz has given some interesting comments as well, talking about next year's driver lineup, and says this: I still personally cannot understand certain choices in the driver market. Now, who would he be talking about? There's maybe a couple of teams. The chief one, of course, has got to be Red Bull, right? I mean, Sainz has got to be sitting there thinking, hang on a second, how has Perez got that drive when I have not? And we'll talk a bit more about Perez here in a couple of minutes' time. Certainly, I think it was from, Zach Brown was making these comments and saying that, no, Perez has shown that he's capable of making the podium, which is kind of a disrespectful thing to say. I mean, obviously he is a race winner, Checo, and he's like, oh, well, Checo's capable of getting a podium. It's like, well, yeah, if everyone else crashes out in front of him, maybe. But Perez has shown he's capable. He just needs to release his inner brake and things will get tight again very quickly. The battle will go to the ends. So I don't really know what Zach Brown's yapping about here. The reality is that I don't think Perez is making this majestic comeback. I mean, for some reason, people keep talking about this idea for the last 2 seasons that, oh, well, Perez, he just needs to get out of the slump and he's going to be back. It's like, well, we saw that in Baku. He had a good weekend, still crashed at the end of it with Sainz and scored no points. And since then, of course, it's still been a disaster. So that's what Zach Brown says on Perez. He actually said this on Max, an incredible racing driver who pushes the rules to the limit, but you have to show him where the limits are. If that isn't done, you'll end up with scenes like the one between himself and Lewis back in 2021, where Lewis said, enough is enough. I don't think we want to get back to that. So pretty funny how it works out, isn't it? Because after Brazil, McLaren were quite quiet, really. They didn't want to say too much against Max because he had the dominant drive. But give it a couple of weeks and Zach Brown's back at it again, throwing daggers the way of Max. Are they fair? Maybe. But are they, I wouldn't say mistimed, but do they not really hit the same with the way the championship currently is? I would certainly argue that. But let's talk about some of the drama. So a few days ago now, Toto Wolff made some comments on the High Performance podcast about Lewis Hamilton and the decision of Toto and Mercedes not to give Hamilton what he wanted going into 2023, 2024 and beyond. They gave Hamilton a 1+1 year deal. He wanted a 2+1 year deal. They didn't give Hamilton the ambassadorial relationship that he seemingly wanted. And Toto Wolff explained that actually Hamilton leaving to Ferrari made his job easier on some level because it ensured that he never had to tell Lewis that, no, we don't think you're the right man for the job anymore. We are going to move on. So Toto wasn't happy that Lewis had departed because it meant that he couldn't get Norris or Leclerc just a few months after they re-signed new deals. But in some sense, Toto was kind of happy to say, okay, Hamilton moves on. We bring in Antonelli. That's the future, and it makes my life easy because I don't have to tell Hamilton that he isn't good enough anymore. That's basically what Toto said publicly about this situation, and the full quote actually maybe got even worse. Look, I'm not saying Toto's necessarily wrong. Everyone has a shelf life, if you want to describe it like that. There's obviously going to be a time when Hamilton's 75, when he's not going to be competing for Formula 1 World Championships. Like, there's obviously something to that. It's just the way that it was said by Toto seemed a bit disrespectful about, by the numbers, the best driver in the history of the sport and the driver that basically won you all of your championships. So I think that's the point here. Like, Toto in what he says isn't necessarily wrong. It's just the implication of what he says doesn't really hit right. And this is what he says. There's a reason why we only signed the 1+1. We're in a sport where cognitive sharpness is extremely important, and I believe everyone has a shelf life. I need to look at the next generation. It's the same in football. Managers like Sir Alex or Pep Guardiola, they anticipate the drop in performance of their top stars, basically, and brought in junior players that obviously continue the legacy. So the statement there is quite clear. There isn't really any mischaracterization of that. There isn't really any, oh, you didn't get the context. Like, it's pretty clear, right? Toto basically says, we're concerned of Hamilton's decline in performance, and therefore we had to bring in the newer generation and weren't willing to commit to Hamilton in the longer term. Does that necessarily go as far to say that Toto believes that Hamilton is washed up and has fallen off? Not necessarily. I guess the argument here from Toto is that no, he is just saying that it was a possibility they had to consider. I guess that's what he's getting at when he now says, oh, well, you know, people took this out of context or his comments were misconstrued. It's like, I don't really think they were. Like, I read those comments from Toto, and I think the implication is relatively straightforward and obvious. It's just maybe not an implication that you want to make about a driver who's done everything for you over the last decade in your team. So Toto today then says, well, I didn't really mean it like that. And he said the following: what I was referring to is that all of us, we age, whether it's in being in a car or on the pitch or as a manager or an entrepreneur. So this is a point that I was making a few days ago and saying, look, at the end of the day, Toto, you might want to look in the mirror a little bit, making comments like this. And he says that that's what he's doing. This is what I'm trying to do with myself, to understand, am I going from great to just good? Because good is not in Formula 1 anymore. And this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it implies that what he implied about Hamilton, as in he's got to ensure that Hamilton is still great and top level, he's looking at with himself. So he's wondering, is Hamilton still great or is he just good? And he's asking the same questions about himself as well. But contrary to my own self-assessment, I think we see with Lewis that he's very much there when the car is right, and we haven't been able to give him the car for him to perform best. And that's a frustration that we equally have in the team and for himself. But he's very sharp. He's different to when he was a 20-year-old. That's certainly clear. But his experience and racecraft is tremendous. So what does he mean here? Does he mean slower? Or like, you know, what's he getting at? Because he says he's sharp, he's different to when he was 20, but his experience and racecraft is tremendous. So he's kind of implying that maybe he's slower than he used to be. I don't know. It's an interesting set of statements from Toto, really, because he's kind of half backtracking and saying, I don't really mean it like that. But then he goes on to say, yeah, Lewis is still good when we give him the car, and we haven't given him the car, which is obviously absolutely right, but he still kind of implies what he initially said. So, look, at the end of the day, I'm not sure either party is necessarily wrong. It's just the situation that feels a little bit strange. There's been strange circumstances this season between Hamilton and Mercedes. Some of these theories about why his car wasn't performing, the tyre temperatures not up to scratch of Russell's when they were going into Q3, all this type of stuff. And then you've got Toto saying, oh, well, Hamilton was reaching the end of his shelf life, and then saying, oh, well, I didn't really mean it like that. We haven't given him the car. Lewis is still very sharp, but maybe isn't as fast as it used to be. Kind of, says all about the same thing as far as I'm concerned. So it's a little bit frustrating maybe to see that Hamilton's, the end of his time at Mercedes is ending like this. I would say it would be nice to have a beautiful send-off for Hamilton. Maybe they'll get that in Abu Dhabi, but it's not like Hamilton's been having the best time with the Mercedes since the summer break. Toto not having the best time with Hamilton since the summer break, it seems, and it does seem a little bit like this relationship that was so strong for so long is going to end on a little bit of a sour note than might otherwise have been expected. But at the end of the day, Hamilton still got 2 victories on the board this season. He had a 1-2 with Verstappen in Silverstone and a 1-2 with Piastri, technically, back in Spa. I will say these numbers are quite interesting from F1 Dan. This year we have had 7 1-2s between Verstappen and Lando in some regards. There have been only 1 1-2 for Piastri Norris back in Budapest, obviously, right in Hungary, which was, a strange one to say the least. And it is interesting that if you look at these pairings, I mean, in the best car for probably the majority of the season, there's only been 1 McLaren 1-2, there's been 2 Ferrari 1-2s, and there's been 3 1-2s with Leclerc and Piastri, which is pretty remarkable to think about, isn't it? With them in various orders. So, that's your situation this season. It's all kind of strange. It's been a fascinating season, of course, in various ways, but it just goes to show that things aren't always as they seem with the strength of the cars here in Formula 1. But very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.